Hello again, I am Blunty, and as you can see before you, I've been on a bit of a journey, an adventure through various approaches and styles and types of grips, mouse shells, mouse skates, whatever you want to call them, for the Nintendo Switch 2 JoyCon's new mouse mode. And big shout out, by the way, to Prusa, who they're not directly sponsoring this, but they did send me one of their brand new Prusa CORE ONE printers to test out doing this sort of stuff, and a few other bits and pieces going forward as well. There's other explorations of Switch 2 accessories coming up based around some 3D printed stuff and some non-Switch 2 related stuff as well. Long story short, before I get to the sort of video dedicated to the breakdown of the experience of using Prusas and 3D printers these days as opposed to 8 years ago when I last touched them, it is so good now and so easy. And if you've ever been intimidated by how complicated and messy and awkward and how much you had to learn to get 3D prints done, yeah, that's all changed. It's ridiculously easy to just squirt these things out of a printer and barely have an idea what you're doing and get a great result. So that's been a fun adventure too. But on the mouse mode stuff, I did learn some very important things in my experimentation here. Now, one thing I will point out before we move on to some specifics is some of these shells were pre-release shells. They were designed by people anticipating the Switch 2's launch, and so they were basing their designs of these on some 3D scans someone did from a JoyCon at an event or something. We don't know how they 3D scanned it, probably using their phone, one of the LiDAR scanners on your phone, you can do that. So the 3D prints that were produced were kind of rough and ready, and I've got a couple of examples here. I printed these in different styles and orientations. One of the first things I printed on the Prusa printer, actually, just to sort of get a feel for how the thing behaves in different circumstances. You can see one of these is quite a bit cleaner than the other. I learned by doing, and that's what I did. But the issue with these 3D scans is they were very, very accurate, except for the fact they were a couple of millimeters off on the little nubby thing that goes into the Switch. It's almost exactly right, but maybe a millimeter, 2 millimeter too short on this. So these shells that were designed before anyone had one of these in hand don't actually fit the real JoyCon, which is why some of these won't have links in the down below because they've been taken offline because, well, they don't work with the real thing. But they were useful nonetheless for figuring out the feel of things. As you can see there, that one, this shell was designed with this model in mind, snaps in perfectly, but, pop it out of there. If we try and put the real one in, yeah, no luck there. But like I said, these were still really, really useful in getting an idea of the feel of these things, how they sit in the hand, how the orientation works, how that reach for the button works. Because that's one of the big things that I learned with all this experimentation. Despite it being a mouse mode, and you think, well, it's pretty obvious. You put it down on a surface, you grab it like a mouse, and you move it around, you click and drag, and whatever else you do with the mouse. But you don't actually hold it like a mouse. And it's not just because it's skinnier. And just on that note, the skinniness of it, you really don't want to use it raw. It's very, very unstable just using it straight off the Switch, which is why Nintendo provides you with one of these, which snaps on just to the bottom there. It only increases the width of it by, what are we going to say, 50% or so, but it does have some little mouse skates at the other end made out of the same material you find on the bottom of regular mice, and that does improve stability massively, so definitely you want to use those. And if you're like me, I'm really annoyed by the fact that these are also doubling up as the wrist strap attachment. I cut mine off because trying to use this in mouse mode with the wrist strap sort of interfering and dragging along the desk and everything was just a sensory nightmare for me, so as you can see, I chopped mine off. But yeah, that's our baseline. And when I was experimenting with this is where I started to learn something really, really important because, yeah, with regular mice, you hold them in this orientation, right? Up, down, straight along the axis. Maybe you tilt it a little bit, but you're still going up, down like that. These work a little bit differently. Because of the way they're designed to be a mouse and a controller compromise, you're going to need to reach for these buttons in a lot of games. Cyberpunk was my test case. That's the only game I have right now. That's a real game as opposed to Nintendo's sort of welcome tour thing that has a mouse mode that works in real quote-unquote gameplay. And unfortunately, Cyberpunk has a pretty big issue with mouse mode. And it's not in the basic functionality, which works fine. It is the fact that you cannot reassign any controls. And the way they've approached mouse mode is they simply do everything with the mouse, what they used to do with the right stick. So it only affects aiming, which means all your regular controls are still in place. So your left and right click, on your mouse be left and right click. These buttons here, ZR and R, they don't change functionality, which means your right click, which would normally be ADS, is still grenade or secondary item use or whatever you've got assigned to that. So you still have to ADS with the left, which is not a natural thing to do if you are used to mouse and keyboard controls. Right click for ADS. You will also be using your left hand for things like changing your weapon, reloading, crouching, all that sort of stuff. That on Cyberpunk on the Switch 2 is all still right here, and it's really, really awkward. I would love to be able to reassign those buttons to the D-pad, because you use reload, switch weapon, crouch, all that sort of stuff way more often than you do the stuff normally on the D-pad here, which is like call your car, use your phone, turn on the radio, stuff like that. I'd like to reassign those to these buttons so I can just not have to reach for them, but it is what it is, so we have to deal with what it is. So that aside, I found because you need to use these buttons in game, you don't hold the mouse vertically like you would expect. You have to tilt it a little bit and hold it that way. So my hand is this way, the controller is this way. That enables my thumb to get to those buttons. You see what I'm saying there? If I hold it vertically, my thumb's natural resting position is way down here near the thumbstick, which does precious little in mouse mode, at least in Cyberpunk. I need those buttons at my thumb because I need to get to those. So that is the first big difference in ergonomics when you're talking what you're used to with a regular mouse and what this is asking of you. So that's massively informed how each one of these felt, because it turns out that the big chunky ones you'd think would be the most natural feeling mouse replacement shell. Maybe not so much this one, which is literally just a huge brick. I just printed that out as the extreme case of big chunky boy. And even the sort of ergonomic ones like this, which even have little finger grooves in there, none of these actually feel right when you're using them in game because of that. Oops, I'm going to get rid of this. Because of that difference. Oh, wait. That's one of the ones that was done pre-release, so we have to use the dummy for that. So when you put your hand on this, it does feel quite a lot like a regular mouse. It's a bit higher at the back because you have to account for this, the edge of the JoyCon not trailing off like a mouse would normally. There's a big difference there. So this tends to dig into your palm a bit more than a regular mouse will, so you also have to account for that. But yeah, because of this ergonomic, being reminded of a mouse, when you turn it sideways so you can get to those buttons, it doesn't feel right anymore. Suddenly, it feels really, really awkward to try and use it like that. So we start thinking about thinner ones, like this one here. And as you can see, I've done this in two-tone. This was part of my printing experimentation process. I manually chopped this model in half and printed the bottom part in red and the top part in black. And I was also testing out pre-printing some little friction fit pegs to snap this thing together. And they work fantastic, by the way. This is not glued together or anything. This is just snap together stuff. I could unsnap this if I needed to. And we'll talk about maybe unsnapping it later, because there is something else I want to talk about that is a big problem with a lot of these designs as well, and might be a big problem with the designs of off-the-shelf solutions that sort of copycatted some of these early 3D printed designs and perhaps were based on dummy Joy-Cons that third-party manufacturers might have had access to and not the real thing. Even if they were really, really accurate to the size and shape of this thing, they had the 3D models direct from Nintendo or something, but didn't have the real one in hand. There is a big mistake they might have made, but we'll come to that. So let's talk about each of these in turn. We'll get rid of these ones here, because these ones are in fact just the left-handed version of a couple of the other ones here, which I printed out just in case that was useful. Turns out not so useful, so we'll get rid of those. So we've already talked about the big chunky boys and how they just do not feel right when you're trying to use them with that sort of tilt in hand. So get rid of those. Out you go. Now we're talking about the skinnier ones. This one here, I thought I would like really quite a lot, which is why I went to the extra effort of being fancy when I printed it. But as it turns out, when I went to use the thing, and this one is designed to fit the proper Joy-Con, using it in that cantilevered kind of angle, it doesn't feel right. What tends to happen is my fingers slide about on this thing, and it doesn't feel like I'm getting a secure grip. I do like that it has the skirt that extends through the other end here, which gives that sort of sense of extra stability. It is very, very stable and smooth, and the Prusa printer printed the bottom of these really glass smooth. Once I settle on a design that I really, really like, I will actually get some proper mouse skates and sort of glue them onto the bottom of one of these things. But for now, what I learned is this sort of mouse-like design is not, in fact, the way to go. No to that one. So then we come to something like this one, which is mouse-like but cut off on the edge here. And initially, when I was testing this thing, again, pre-launch, this is one of those pre-launch ones that only fits the dummy model, I thought I liked this quite a lot because my other fingers were free to sort of curl around the edge, which means if I'm playing a game that does support a dual mode, which Cyberpunk does not, it makes it really easy to pick up. It's pretty chunky in hand. I don't know whether you'd want to continue playing like this, but if you just need to pick it up to go through a menu or select some items or do some crafting or whatever it is that is more appropriate to do this way than with a mouse, that is a really, really good design for that. I like that quite a lot. But again, using it in that cantilevered mode where my hand is this way, but I've got this tilted so I can reach those buttons, it doesn't feel quite right. It feels very, very close to quite right, but we're not quite there. So then we talk about this one, which is very, very similar in how thick it is, but it sort of canters off back here a bit and doesn't sort of end quite as abruptly as that one. It curves off the edge here a bit more gently as well, and has a bigger skate down here by your heel of your hand. So when we put that one in, that one feels not quite as good as this one when it comes to the top end here where your fingers sort of rest, these three fingers. But the skate does provide a nice place for your thumb to rest underneath the buttons because that's a bit flatter than this one is. This one sort of drafts off like that, whereas this one sort of flares out into a more flat surface. But yeah, that feels a lot better in that sort of cantilevered angle that we're going for, but we're still not quite there because the fingers still don't feel right on this side. They still slip and slide around a little bit. So then we come to this. And again, unfortunately, this is one of the pre-released ones that only fits the dummies, so I haven't been able to test this out practically in-game, but you know, I learned a lot by doing the other experiments, so I know what to feel for now. This one I like really quite a lot. It's very, very stable, flares out nicely at the base. It does have the sheer drop off for my fingers to rest, but also has a little skirt for the fingers to sit on, so they're not dragging along the mousing surface itself, as you can see there. That is as close to ideal as I've found yet for my taste. A blend somewhere between these three would be ideal. Now, there is a design that I think blends these quite well. I have not printed that as I'm recording this bit to camera, but we'll come back to that later. Now, here's the big thing I learned when testing a bunch of these, and they all suffer the same issue. They are all too thick. So let me put this in here for you there. So you can see there's got a little window for the mouse sensor to point out. Some of these have full slots. Some of these do not. It doesn't really matter so long as that little window there can see the ground beneath it. That's your mouse sensor right there. That's exactly the same technology as you find inside your mouse. Now, the big problem I found with these is this mouse sensor is not quite calibrated the same as a regular mouse. Not every gamer does this, but the way I tend to use a mouse, and always have done, is I lift. I do a slight claw grip with these fingers here, and I lift off the surface when I'm looking for more movement. I'm not one of those guys who does the big sweeping wave movements all the way from the shoulder down. This is all forearm stuff and wrist stuff. Lift, lift. Now, when I say these things aren't calibrated the same, that's what I'm talking about. A lot of gaming mice are calibrated to account for that. That's a very common behavior. A lot of mice, including this one, you can change the lift sensitivity. So you can adjust exactly at what point when you lift that it decides it's no longer tracking. So you can adjust how sensitive it is while you're off versus as you're coming back down. So you don't always need to touch the surface for the mouse to engage its optical sensor again with the movement tracking. There is no such settings for this. It is a preset setting, and it's not designed to account for mouse feet this thick. So what I found is, when I'm testing this in Cyberpunk, when I do my lift, it will lose tracking. It will act as if I've done this. I go, okay, you're not using the mouse anymore. We'll turn off the mouse bit. And it takes a few moments, sometimes even a few seconds, to re-engage mouse mode again when I lift off. So I lift and I put back down, and it won't track anymore. And it's really, really, really interruptive to gameplay, and it got me killed a couple of times in my testing. So let's look at what Nintendo themselves has done with theirs. Their mouse feet do lift off the surface just slightly, but very, very slightly. Let me grab a game case here to see if I can show you what I mean. So as you can see there, the mouse sensor is flush with the bottom of this. And as we go down, we are very, 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 very close to the edge. You can see very little light peeking through there. In fact, let's go one step further and see if we can really, really show this off. I'll shine this right on the bloody camera. There we go. So, there we go. You can just see the gap there. So that is what Nintendo considers the ideal distance for this to be off the surface. And each and every one of these 3D printed shells has a more significant distance between the sensor and the table than that. As you can see there, that's quite a chunky distance. Luckily, this is a really, really, really easy problem to solve, because even if the designs that you download from other people who've designed these things haven't accounted for that, they haven't seen that problem yet, they haven't fixed it yet, there is a way for you to solve it. And I showed you earlier how I did it on this. In the slicing program I used to print this, I manually sliced off the bottom of this model so I could print it in a separate color. In other words, I did this in 2 separate print jobs. I loaded up the red filament, printed that bit, unloaded the red filament, loaded up the black filament, and printed the rest, and stuck the 2 together. And as I mentioned before, I didn't actually glue this together. I used a special feature in Prusa's slicer software to create some pegs, some friction-free pegs that are supposed to snap in and snap out. Ooh, and I've just snapped a couple of them off right there. They're not really designed to come apart again. They're just designed to make a fitting or maybe be locators so you can glue it together more permanently. But yeah, they are very, very small and very, very delicate, so I've just ruined that. But in doing that, guess what happens? In doing that, suddenly my mouse is right on the surface again. Now, this is not the correct distance. I didn't measure this when I sliced it. I just went, yeah, we'll slice it just about there. That'll look pretty cool, the red and black together. But when I find the exact sort of compromise between all these design ideas that I like, if it is too deep and doesn't account for my lift off, all I need to do is slice off the bottom, and instead of printing it in a different color, not print it. And that is one of the really nice things about 3D printing this sort of stuff, because you can do these experiments, you can test an experiment and find out what you like. And even if you do not have any clue at all how to 3D model, you can still adjust the models that other people have made pretty easily by doing things like slicing off parts of them. And there's other really easy things you can do to 3D prints that we'll talk about in a future video, I'm sure. But for right now, yeah, once I settle on the absolute perfect balanced design I want, if the lift-off distance is too great, all I have to do is, it takes 3 seconds in the slicer. It takes 3 seconds to fix that. So, all of that said, and everything I learned from testing with all of these, I have 2 more prints to make. So let's do some sort of fancy douchebag video cut, and we'll come back when I've done those and we'll report. Boop, boo, there we go. So, couple of new prints all done and tested, and man, at the end of the day, the result here is so far away from what I expected. I had expected something like this to be the winning solution. And I haven't mentioned this one at all in today's video for a very good reason. I might wind up doing a separate complete video on this. I need to reprint a couple of parts on this for reasons we'll get into if I ever do that video. But it is a complete mouse shell solution. And I figured that for a mouse mode for the JoyCon, you'd want something that most closely resembles the ergonomics of a mouse itself. But as it turns out, like we were talking about when we were going through the other permutations, that just isn't the case. The unique way you interact with this, the way the buttons are laid out, the way you need to grip it to get to those buttons, they all inform a very different set of ergonomics. So these are in fact the 2 winners I've chosen. These are the kind of designs you want to look out for if you're looking out for an off-the-shelf solution, if you don't happen to have access to a 3D printer, don't have a friend or a workmate or a family member or whatever with a 3D printer, and don't want to use one of those sites where you can get 3D printing on demand. You send them the file and go, hey, print me this, and send it to me. And they do that, which is another option you can do if you don't have access to your own 3D printer or someone else's. But the minimalism here is so far away from what I expected, it's ridiculous. So let's start with a slightly fancier looking one. Friction fit, of course, as we snap in there, a little bit tighter than I would quite like, but very, very secure. So What we've got going on here is we've got a little lobe on the side here where your middle finger sits. That finger right there, that one sits right there. This finger, that sits right. This finger right here, that sits right. What am I, 8? Grow up. I'm 46. Grow up. So that finger sits really nicely there, and we've got a little curvy cutaway here for the rest of the fingers. I'm not sure how many permutations of this design that Supa made. That's who did this. It's called the Switch 2 Mouse Grip Supporter by Supa. Found it on Maker World. We'll link to it in the down below, of course, as well as a bunch of the other ones we've been talking about. But yeah, this has obviously gone through a few permutations of design because the way your hand sits with this, the way the finger rests here, the way these curl through here, just really, really comfortably for a really soft, comfortable grip that has no fatigue associated with it whatsoever. And a little thumb grip here, a little pad for your thumb to sit on, which is free and clear of the other buttons here, so you don't accidentally press anything. So you can sit your thumb there when you don't need it and move it to the buttons when you do. This is a really well thought out bit of design, and I really, really appreciate it. And of course, that issue we were talking about before, not a problem here. This is very close to a flush fit. It is closer to the mouse sensor, is closer to the table than Nintendo's own solution. So I had no worries at all with liftoff or anything like that. As I was playtesting this, I could lift off very, very smoothly and plop down very, very smoothly and not lose any tracking at all. Very, very reliable in use. So this is the one that I really like when I'm looking for a more mouse-like grip. So this is one of 2 solutions that I highly recommend for you. The other one is even simpler still, which is this one here. This is called the Switch 2 JoyCon Skate. Someone identified only as HC, again on the Maker World site. And as you can see here, it's basically just what Nintendo have done. It's just a foot, basically, or a skate, literally, but bigger and wider than Nintendo's own solution. And as you might assume, that makes it very, very stable. I don't know if I can catch the light. Here we go, I can catch the light. They've even got some roughed up pads here, very, very deliberately lifted off the print surface, so they are rough, which makes these spots ideal for adhesive for mouse skates. And of course, you can just buy those little mouse skate pads and circles and whatnot to slap on there. But again, I was just using this straight off my print bed. And the results I'm getting from the Prusa, anything that touches the build bed, it comes away very, very smooth anyway. So it's been really nice. So again, just a very, very simple clip-in friction fit. And again, very, very secure. It's not coming off there accidentally when you lift off or anything like that. And yeah, it's just, it's never, ever going to tip over accidentally. And when you're using it in play, it feels very, very, very stable. There's a lip around the outside here for a thumb to rest on, a little lip there for your fingertips to rest on there. But as far as just ridiculously simple solutions go, that's the way to go. And of course, lifting up and using it in a JoyCon mode is slightly more comfortable than this, because obviously this is designed to be used like that. But you can lift it up and use this with the JoyCon in it. But if you are playing a game that has the dual mode, where sometimes you're doing this, sometimes you're doing this, sometimes you're doing this, this might be the best solution versus that. So again, regardless of whether or not you have access to a 3D printer, these are the kinds of design decisions you want to be looking out for in third-party off-the-shelf solutions as well. I've no doubt that these will be on offer from sort of numerous brands you've probably never heard of for really quite cheap from those, dodgy Chinese sites and whatnot. I truly hope nobody rips off this design, and if third party wants to make something like this, they'll go ahead and contact the person who designed this and license it properly so they get paid for their hard work here, because it is really truly a very pleasant piece of industrial design. They should be very proud. So those are the very surprising results. Not mouse-like at all, but both significantly improve the feel of using the JoyCon in mouse mode as you're playing. So there you go. Hopefully this has been informative and useful to you. For those of you with 3D printers, now you've got some directions to try and things to think about when you're selecting what to burn some filament on. To the rest of you, if you're looking for off-the-shelf solutions, now you've got some ideas about what does and doesn't work. And again, it really, really surprised me that a mouse-like solution was not the best solution for this in the end. Isn't that interesting? So again, a big special thank you to Prusa for hooking me up with a 3D printer so I could do stuff like this. Thank you to the Switch 2 Doc crew who came to my rescue quite recently. You know what you did. Love you guys. And of course, to my patrons whose ongoing support is incredibly valuable. Love that too. Thank you ever so much for that. I am Blunty. I will catch you next time. Thanks for watching.